I've been dealing with some laryngitis this week, so I'm being mic'd this morning, so you can hear me when my voice gives out or something. What are cowboys like? What are cowboys like? Well, if you want to know what cowboys are like, you could watch Western movies, you could read Western novels, but I think what you'd probably end up with are the caricatures, the myths of cowboys in those. You ought to better read historical works, maybe interviews of actual cowboys. And there are a few around still. What are movie stars like, or professional athletes, or opera singers? Well, the truth is that no two people are exactly alike in any such group. Pick any group of people as a whole, and you'll find a wide spectrum of personalities and characteristics. Not all rock stars are demanding and spoiled. Not all millionaires are selfish. Not all business tycoons are predatory. Despite the common myths about such people, there are no common characteristics of such groups. And part of the reason for that is there are no guidebooks for such groups. I don't know of any books that millionaires can buy to know what millionaires are supposed to act like. There aren't any books for actors to know how to behave when they become famous. There are no Fame for Dummies books. But when it comes to being a Christian and how a Christian is to behave, there is a book. And that's the New Testament part of the Bible. It tells us how we are to behave, what we're to value, and what kind of reputation we are to develop. Jesus tells us there, and the apostles that he picked following him, who wrote the New Testament, tell us these things. For example, in John's Gospel, chapter 13, verse 34, Jesus said, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Now that's a real general statement. Love one another. The only clarification there is that you're to love each other as I have loved you, as he loved his disciples. But he doesn't say there what he did. And even if we read the Gospels and read how he talked to his apostles and how he treated them, we don't get very many instances of trying to figure out how he loved them. We don't have much of the day-to-day interaction between them. I mean, here we have Jesus and a group of men and some women who traveled around the countryside, which means they camped out many times in the countryside in the night. With or without a tent, we don't know. They just lay down and used a rock for a pillow, like Jacob did. We don't know. Somebody had to fix food, and there was interaction, and there were questions being asked of Jesus, and answers given, and lots of things about that. We don't know the interactions of that. We don't know if the disciples at times bickered with each other. We see a little bit of that competition with each other in the scriptures. Did they bicker and fight like siblings at times in camp and such? How did Jesus deal with all these things? We don't have any of those clues. Instead, we get the specifics of how to love each other in the rest of the New Testament. In the letters written by the apostles, where they tell us how to love each other, how to interact with each other, how to care for each other. They get more specific about what love for each other means. And many of those, not all of them, but many of those commands about how to love each other are just short, sentences, just very short commands without much explanation as to how to do that, even in that specific kind of thing. And the letter of Hebrews contains some of those short commands. And this week and next week, we're going to look at some of these just briefly. I'm not going to spend a whole sermon dealing with each one or that kind of thing. They're given to us briefly. We're going to deal with them briefly as we face them. So we're in chapter 12. As we continue to work our way through the letter of Hebrews, we're in chapter 12, and we're in verse 14. He writes to them, "Make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy." And as we worked on that 2 weeks ago, that holy part, or 3 weeks ago, make every effort to be holy. That was also part of it. Make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one misses the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. He could bring about no change in mind, though he sought the blessing with tears. He starts with the command to make every effort to live in peace with all men. That means not just each other in here, it means us living in peace with the people out there. And it seems that's harder and harder to do these days. People take offense at the smallest thing that they disagree with. Even among Christians, there's a lot of rancor in the Christian world, especially online today. You see those who self-identify as Christians attacking others who self-identify as Christians for all kinds of things. Instead of saying, I don't understand why you said that, or why you believe that, or why you feel that, what lies behind that, what beliefs or values or desires cause you to want that, to think that, to believe that. Instead of asking such questions, we just attack each other. And it hurts our reputation in the world. And the same kind of thing can happen in churches, where we don't take the time to ask each other, I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand why you believe that, or why you hold that opinion, why you value that so much. We both value this, but we come at it in different ways. We need to ask those questions to maintain our understanding of each other and live in peace with each other. We must make every effort to live in peace with each other, which requires that we actively care for each other. I think that's the fulfillment of Jesus' command, that we're doing things that actively care for each other. Now, the rest of the commands he gives, after verse 14 there, are all part of a sentence together. He starts this here in the NIV, see to it. And most of our English translations say, see to it, or make sure. It's a very strong Greek word here. Verses 14 to 16 are all one sentence in the Greek manuscript. So this strong word applies not just to the first command, see to it that no one misses the grace of God. It also applies to the next one there, see to it that no bitter root grows up, in verse 16, and they wrote it this way as two sentences, but they put it in again in the NIV, see that no one is sexually immoral. See that no one is godless like Esau. And we miss that. It doesn't always come across in our translations when they chop up these long Greek sentences into shorter English sentences. We lose some of the impact it's supposed to have. So he starts off with this strong word at these commands. And basically he's saying, hold each other accountable. Hold each other accountable. Be accountable to each other and for each other. And we don't like that idea, especially in our culture. That's not very, it doesn't fit our culture today. But it is a part of Christianity in many places in the world today, where they take this accountability for each other very seriously. And it is part of our history. I want to read you an excerpt from You Are a Great People. This is the church's copy. I had it in my library, but it's the church's copy. And since I'm retiring soon, I should put it back in the church office for you to read. It's called You Are a Great People. It's a history of Maryland, Delaware Baptists. I want to read something to you from the early days. This is the section 1793 to 1821, back when they were first forming associations in Maryland. So he calls us to be serious about each other's relationship with Jesus. We tend to be Lone Ranger Christians. It's just between me and the Lord, and it excludes you. But that's not what Jesus says. That's not what the apostles lived out in the New Testament. And so he says, see to it. See to it that no one misses the grace of God. Now that's kind of an odd statement. We need to work on that a bit. To determine the meaning, we must first understand what grace is. Let me give you a simple definition of grace as it's used in the New Testament. It's God's blessings in us and through us, which we do not deserve. God's blessings in us and through us, which we do not deserve. Well, with that, see to it that no one misses the grace of God. What is he saying? Well, he could be saying, make sure that no one falls away from following Jesus. That, after all, has been the central point of this whole letter. He's been warning them time after time after time in chapter after chapter of falling away from Jesus, because some were tempted to do so because of the persecution they were experiencing. And yet at the same time, he said at least twice in the letter, but I expect better things of you. He believed that they were not almost Christians who might fall away. He believed they were true Christians who would stick with Jesus if he explained it to them. So I think at this point that he's not saying that. He's not talking about falling away in this passage, in this command here. I believe he's saying the following. See to it that no one fails to receive God's blessings. If grace is receiving God's blessings, he's saying, see to it that no Christian fails to receive God's blessings. He's not considering them Christians who are going to fall away. He's considering them Christians who are not growing. Not growing Christians, not experiencing the fullness of the blessings that God has for us. Jesus wants us to experience abundant life. Now, I've never understood that abundant simply to mean eternal life in heaven. I've always understood that abundant life to mean here and now on earth, a different experience of life than the non-Christians are living. That God has a lot of blessings for us. And that this man is writing that we not miss receiving those blessings that God has for us. And I think that many indeed are missing the blessings of God. Many are missing the grace of God. The things that God wants us to give. And they're missing the blessings of God, more blessings of God than they already have, because they're satisfied. They're satisfied with their current state or level, if you will, of spiritual growth. I like where I am in my relationship to God right now. I don't really want to grow more. I'm not worried about Christian maturity beyond where I am right now. I'm satisfied with my shallow relationship. You'll use that word, but shallow relationship to Jesus. And I think it shows up in our prayers for each other and ourselves. That we most often, pray for each other's health and safety. For each other's health and safety. You see a little bit of that in the New Testament, not very much. Most of the prayers expressed for Christians by other Christians in the New Testament have to do with spiritual growth, have to do with completion in Jesus Christ. When is the last time you prayed for spiritual growth, for spiritual maturity, for yourself or for somebody else in the church? When have you been praying likely for someone to move from being a casual attender to a committed member of Emmanuel Baptist Church? It is evident in the New Testament that spiritual maturity of all of us is God's will. It needs to become part of how we think as Christians, how we live, how we pray, how we worship. He says, see to it that no one misses the grace of God. And then see to it that no one grows bitter. That no one grows bitter. This could be bitterness against another Christian. It could be bitterness against a non-Christian. It might even be bitterness against God. Signs of such bitterness usually involve griping. A person who's griping or complaining or just retelling how someone hurt them. How God has limited their life. God hasn't given me enough of this, or God gave me too much of that. And they keep harping on it. Whenever you meet with them, they're always complaining about something. They're always griping about something. They're always complaining about something. And maybe if it involves somebody that hurt them, they're talking about, we got to get the truth out. Got to let everybody know what they did to me. Or even revenge. We need to catch such talk in its early stages. As Christians in a church together, we need to be listening for signs of bitterness or signs of resentment or signs of hatred, of revenge, of belittling. He said, see to it that no one grows bitter. And see to it that no one is causing trouble in the church. There are hundreds of ways of causing trouble in a church. Gossip causes trouble. Criticism of church leaders causes trouble. Criticism of how things are done. People go on and on about such things. More than once I have heard someone say, different people in our congregation, you know, there's a small group that controls Emmanuel Baptist Church. Well, it's not true that there's a small group that actively tries to control Emmanuel Baptist Church. What happens really is that the people who are most involved, who do most of the work, tend to be the ones that are making most of the decisions. If you want more influence, get more involved. If you want to lessen the influence of others, get more involved. That's all there is to it. The people that are doing the work are usually the ones having the most say. You can have more say. Another cause of trouble is refusing to forgive and be reconciled. Well, somebody did something. Well, just let it go. There are times that you need to let it go. And there are other times that you don't. When my wife and I were going through premarital counseling, Jack Oliver, our pastor at the time, was counseling us, and he said, as you start living together, you're going to have differences. Things are going to pop up. You're going to notice little habits that your spouse has that you didn't notice when you were dating. And some of those things you are going to be bothering you, and you have to decide, is this something I can live with? Is this something I can live with? And if it's something that you can live with, then you just learn to live with it. You just ignore it. Just, okay, you know. I tend to clack my fingers. I don't know why I just tend to sometimes to clack my fingernails. Which doesn't bother my wife, except when we're sitting on the couch together watching TV, suddenly this hand will go, you know. So Jack says, there are things that you just say, I can live with it. But there are other things that you realize, I can't live with it. And so what you need to do is you need to come to your spouse and say, and some of you heard this because I've used it in premarital with some of you, honey, I need you to. That's the magic phrase. That's the secret code. Whenever your spouse says, honey, I need you to, you put down what you're doing, you perk up your ears, you look at the person and you listen and say, this is important to my spouse. Something I'm doing is bothering. I need to know what it is so we can work through this. And I don't know how many times we did, a couple dozen times in the first couple of years, we said to each other, honey, I need you to. And we talked about it. There are things that somebody in the church may do that kind of bothers you. And there are some things that you do say, I can live with it. But there are other times that you've really been hurt, you've been sinned against, and a confrontation needs to take place for the purpose of reconciliation. Reconciliation is immensely important to Jesus. We have been reconciled to God, and we are now messengers, ambassadors of the message of reconciliation to get Christians reconciled to each other. So to say to someone in your church who's been sinned against, just let it go, is not always the right thing to do. At times we need to get both of them somehow to sit down and face each other and deal with the sin and be reconciled. See to it that no one is causing problems in the church. See to it that no one is sexually immoral. We must not allow the sexual values of the world to infiltrate our thinking. To believe that sex outside of marriage under any circumstances is okay. To think that same-sex relationships are okay. To think that pornography is okay. These things are not okay. No matter how many people outside of Christianity, no matter how many people in our world think they're okay, no matter how legal they become or whatever, to God they're not okay. The clearest example of church discipline in the New Testament involved sexual sin. And see to it that no one is godless like Esau. That means the person is quit being concerned about the will of God. Godliness is about devotion to God and God's will. It's not necessarily like God, which I think is what we tend to think of by that term. It's a devotion to God. It's about piety and devotion are synonyms for godliness. Now you might think that such a person who's not concerned about the will of God any longer would quit attending a church. But that's not necessarily true. When church has been a major part of a person's life, and most of their friends are in the church, they're not just going to walk away. Instead, they continue to participate, but they're just going through the motions of religious devotion. Paul warns Timothy of those who fake godliness. In 2 Timothy 3, 1-2 and verse 5, he wrote, "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be," he mentions a bunch of other things, and then he mentions having a form of godliness, but denying its power, have nothing to do with it. Church discipline, have nothing to do with it. Now you might think such instructions, such commands are just lofty ideals. I mean, oh, it'd be great if we lived that way, but we can't really do those things. But God does not command us to do anything that He will not bring to fruition through willing, humble followers. We are to be accountable to and for each other. And ignoring that limits what God will do in us and through us as a church. We must take seriously all of His commands.